Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to grecochess, the YouTube channel of chess. I'm your host, Harry Losaniziris. If you've seen the previous videos, a few days ago, I reached a point that I was aiming for quite some time, about 2 months. I wanted to reach a chess.com rating of 1500 for the bullet chess. In a previous video, I showed to you the toughest opponent I was able to defeat. And in this and the next video, I'm going to show to you the last two games that I won in order to reach 1500. This game, I believe, is going to be very educational and instructional because it went very long and there are many things to learn, especially about the endings. And please keep in mind that time control 2 minutes with 1 second increment. It means that when we start the game, each of us has exactly 2 minutes to their clocks. After every move, we add 1 second to the time, and all moves need completed before clock goes down to 0. And let's share the screen and see what happened. And once again, I'm going to share only part of the screen in order not to spoil the surprise. If I show you the entire screen, you're going to see the next moves to how the game developed, but I want to keep it move by move. So we'll see how the game progressed as we go along. And let me first share the screen. And here we are. As you see, my opponent is someone called Alt Ife and he's from Nigeria with a rating. This is after the game was 1474. This means before the game it was 1482 and I had 1484 myself. I'm giving in advance the fact that I won that game, but we're going to see how was I able to win it. You may remember that when I usually describe the games, I say that the most common first move for white is pawn to e4, followed by pawn to d4, maybe the English with pawn to c4, maybe the Reti with knight to f3, or even the pawn to g3 to prepare fianchetto. But if one wants to surprise the opponents, one of the less popular openings is pawn to b3. And that's exactly what I've decided to play as first move, pawn to b3. And the question is, how do I reply? I know that my opponent is thinking to place the bishop on b2 from c1 to b2 second move and control the long diagonal that goes from a8, excuse me, from a1 to, no, don't want to move there. I only want to throw the arrow from a1 to h8. How do I reply? Of course, I want to develop my pieces, control the center, and the way I replied is by moving my pawn to e5. I'm going to block the diagonal, and also I have a pawn the center, controls d4, f4, but there's a problem, and you'll see it the moment you see my opponent's next move, expected bishop to b2. The problem is that if I play nothing, the pawn at e5 is lost, so I need to do something to protect it. And the something I decided to do, develop another piece, knight goes to c6. Of course, I could develop it with my pawn going to d6, but then I'm blocking my bishop on f8. Alt-F continues with pawn going to e3. And now I develop the other knight to f6. Now there is going to be an issue, you'll see it later, and I knew it in advance. Bishop will go to b5, and if bishop is exchanged with the knight, the pawn on e5 is lost, assuming I do nothing. And exactly that's what my opponent played. Bishop goes to b5, and I knew, and one needs to know these things in advance, not get surprised. Because if you get surprised, sometimes you'll find a solution, sometimes there is no solution. Sometimes it will take you too much time to find it, especially the first few moves, know what's going to happen. And I was prepared for that, and now I play the move otherwise I wouldn't want to play, but better block your bishop than lose a pawn. My pawn goes to d6. Yes, I'm blocking the bishop on f8. That can only go until e7, but at least I'm saving my pawn. What else could I do? Of course, instead of the pawn, I could have pushed my bishop to d6. Then my bishop on d6 is free. my dark color, but look at the other one on c8. Not only cannot escape, even the pawn on d7 cannot go out. That's why I played pawn to d6. And alt I continues pawn to d4. Until now, we had book moves, as you see. 4 book moves each of us. My pawn goes to d4. Actually, not my pawn. Alt I sends pawn to d4. What does this mean? It means if I do nothing, meaning if I place, for example, a pawn to h6 or a bishop to e7, look what's going to happen. Pawn takes. I have to take back with a pawn because the knight is pinned. Queen takes my queen. And the knight is pinned. I have to take with the king. I lose castling rights and my position is messed up. And although they say to take is a mistake, sometimes there are exceptions, and I decided to take. I take the pawn on d4. The best move, you see the star, that's what it means. And once more to tell everyone that you're going to see the computer evaluation. Positive number means white is doing better, negative black is doing better. Here you see a 0.0. The fact that you see at the bottom left means that black is very, very little marginally better. Star means that I play the best possible move. What else? You're going to see here the times left. It's My opponent has 2 minutes, 2 seconds. Of course, with the increment, they got 5 extra seconds. I have 1 minute, 57 seconds. And this is important, especially when you play bullets with so little time. We completed the first 5 moves, and it is even. I have a very small advantage of 0.04. Let's continue. Of course, Altaif will take back with the pawn. My bishop goes to d7. Just a good move, not the best. Computer wants my pawn to go to e5 to liberate my bishop from f8. Altair develops the knight to f3. Bishop to e7. Kingside castling for Altair. Kingside castling for me. And Altair decides to exchange on c6. It would be nice if I couldn't take back with the bishop, because then I would have my pawns doubled and the h7 pawn isolated. But I take back with the bishop. And my bishop is in a wonderful long diagonal that goes from h1 to a8. Altaif is going to push the pawn at c4, get more space. My rook goes to e8. Altaif would rather have me exchange, but then the queen is in that long diagonal, controls the square b7. I'm not sure what I would do if I did what Altaif, what the computer recommends. A computer may recommend moves that are wonderful if you can see the correct follow-up, and it's not so easy for human, especially someone at my level, to see. And that is why better play a move that may not be the best, but you know the plan and you know how to continue, than a move that on its own is great, but you have no idea how to continue. We completed the 10 moves, and what is happening is Altaif is leading by 0.2. Let's continue. Altaif pushes a pawn to e5, gains more space, not to e5, I'm sorry, to d5, gives more space, and now I have to do something with my bishop on c6 to save it. It's an attack, and there's only one something I can do, bishop to d7. What else? Anywhere else, the bishop is lost. And to have a piece less after 11 moves, not a good idea. Now to c3 develops, my opponent Altaif develops the knight to e3, my bishop to g4, and not blocks, pins the knight on f3. Altaif decides to challenge my bishop, poses the questions it's called. What are you going to do, bishop on g4? Stay there, you're lost. Go to h5, keep the pin. Go elsewhere on the other diagonal, f5 or d7 or c8. There is no pin, especially the last 2 squares, you can't develop your piece. I go to h5, what else? Even though the computer wants me to send it to d7. Usually if you have a pin, try to keep it, if possible, and don't exchange it to the pin piece unless you have to, or unless you're winning material, because the longer you keep the pin, it means that the longer the opponent has practically one less piece to use. Rook to e1 for Altaif. My knight to d7. Why? I want to place my bishop on f6 to have my bishop challenge the other long diagonal. Queen goes to d3. And now there is no pin any longer. If I exchange with a knight, I don't even double my opponent's pieces. And I have to do something. What should I do? And the computer does not think that is a good idea. But if I was white, I would be tempted to play it. Also, queen attacks the pawn at h7. If I do nothing, knight goes to g5, meaning if Altaif had a few moves, 2 moves in a row, it would be made in 3 moves. I have to do something. Bishop goes to g6 and attacks the queen. Keep in mind that we have very little time to think of all these things. 15 moves, and what's the score? Altaif is leading by 0.1, and Altaif has 156, meaning he has lost just more 4 seconds, of course, with the increments. Altaif has used 19 seconds. And myself, I'm down to 1.37, have lost about 1/5 of my overall time. Of course, Altaif is going to save the queen, goes to d2. My knight to c5. I want also to get my space, develop my knight to c5. Pawn to b4 attacks my knight, a 1-move attack. Where can I send the knight? But after I send it, you see the c4 square is unprotected. The c4 pawn is unprotected. My knight goes back to d7. Computer wants it to go to d3, then I attack, then have a double attack, bishop b2 and rook at e1. Most likely Altaif will save the rook and I win the bishop. Then the queen takes back my knight, of course, no net material gain. Then maybe I could place my knight, my bishop on f6 and have a double attack. Attack simultaneously, meaning attack the queen, and behind that is the rook. Perhaps. Good luck, try to find it in 129. Rook to d1, and my bishop goes to f6, where I wanted my bishop to be. Pawn to a3 for Altaif. I'm not sure what exactly is the goal of this move. Yes, give more protection to the b4 pawn. My knight goes to e5. Computer doesn't like it at all. Have a nice knife in the center. I'm attacking the knight on f6. And Altaif needs to do something, because if there's nothing, I take it, and then Altaif has to take it back with the pawn and opens the g file for me. Of course, Altaif takes it. Great moves to the computer. Once again, not so difficult to spot. It's not else remains. I take it back with my bishop. We finished 20 moves. Let's see what the score. Altaif is again ahead by 0.2. Basically, we are at the same level. We are more or less even. What is more important is I have used so much more time. Altaif has 145 remaining and I have only 114. That is minutes and seconds. It is not 1 hour 45 minutes. It's 1 minute 45 seconds. Knight to 2. And now bishops are challenging each other. What should I do? I can exchange a bishop, allow it to be taken, and place my rook on my pawn. I decided to put my my queen there, because now I'm attacking the bishop twice. It's defended only once. That's why Altaif needs to do something. If you can force your opponent to do something, then this means they cannot do something else. So Altaif takes it. I take it with my rook. I don't want my queen to be too exposed in the center, especially to be opposite the white rook on e1. Pawn to f4. Again, a 1-move attack that may weaken, especially weakens the diagonal that leads towards the white king. The diagonal that goes from a7 to g1. Look at that. Now, what should I do? I have to be careful, because fortunately the pawn at a5 has no protection. But if it was protected enough, then my bishop on g6 could be lost. My rook goes to e4. Wonderful position at the center and also attacking the pawn on c4. Altaif saves it by placing the rook on c1. Computer would rather have the pawn move to c5. My other rook goes to e8 and I double my rooks on the open e file, even though computer doesn't like it and would rather have my king go to f8. I'm not sure why. Maybe to avoid the back rank, perhaps. Pawn to c5. The computer liked it before, does not like it now. Once I know what it wants. If the knight goes to g3, attacks my rook, and once it is over, pawn goes to c5, and my bishop on g6 could be lost. Think about it. Knight goes here. Rook most likely will exchange, takes back, win exchange. And now I have to think about my bishop because this move is going to cost my bishop very like. So the only thing I could do is plus there is a danger of the back rank. I have to think both of my bishop and how to avoid back rank. That's why my king had better be at f8 instead of g8. Because if, for example, I move my queen, let's say, to d8 to avoid the back rank, pawn goes here and I lose a bishop. What I would need to do instead of with the queen going there, I would have to push my pawn to h6, which makes yes, but then pawn goes here. I save the bishop and then queen back rank. So really, it would have been a very strong move for white, for Alt-I, if he had followed the computer and placed the rook on g3. How to reply? Just to be safe in advance, have loot for my king and square for my bishop to go. After the pawn goes to c5, pawn to h6, and computer thinks the best move. I completed 25 moves and let's see the score. Now I'm leading by 2.0. From move 20 until move 25, Altaif has made two mistakes. Two moves have question marks. And at this point, I'm leading by 2.0. But look at the time. Altaif has 1 minute 15 seconds remaining. I only have 54 seconds. But let's see how the game continues. Pawn to a4 gives more space. My pawn to a6 to stop the pawn advancing. Or at least stop the b pawn going to b5. Pawn to b5. Inaccuracy. I take it. Inaccuracy. Computer wants me to take the c pawn. Takes it. My queen goes to e7 to exert more pressure on the knight on d2. Now the knight attack 3 times, also more pressure on the pawn on c5. Look at the pawns, okay, maybe not be so important now, but look at the knight. It's attacked 3 times with my rook, with my queen, and with my rook. It's defended twice with the rook and with the queen. What should white do? White, he can bring perhaps the rook to c2, one choice, but decides instead to bring the king to f2. And now the knight is safe. The computer doesn't like it. Would rather have the pawn to b5, and if I dare take the knight, the pawn is near promotion. Maybe, but you have to see a lot of moves ahead, and even under regular conditions, that is tough enough, let alone when both sides have less than a minute on the clock. And this is not for this move, for the remaining of them. I take the pawn now, I win a pawn. Now I'm a net pawn ahead. You can see perhaps the +1 here at the bottom. And let's see. Pawn to g3 for Alt-I. My pawn goes to b6. Why? Stopping the pawn on b5 and protecting the pawn on c5. Yes, double pawns, but 3 of them together, not so bad. They form an island. Well, look at the b5 and d5 pawn, they're isolated. In addition, I have an extra pawn. We continue 30 moves, and what is the score? I'm leading by 3.1. You see the 3.1 here. My advantage becomes larger and larger. Let's continue. Knight to c3 attacks my rook. And now, since I'm already a pawn ahead, why not exchange? And go perhaps to winning ending. An ending at least with a pawn extra. It's not always winning with the pawns, it's very tricky. Better have a pawn that is near promotion, especially a pass pawn near promotion, than a few extra pawns. Take it. Great, says the computer, as if I had any other choice. Take it, take it, take it. And now we exchange, and after 34 moves, we're going to the grand finale, where I have bishop and 6 pawns, and Alt-I has knight and 5 pawns. But it's important which of them are passed. If you look carefully, there is only one passed pawn. I'm going to highlight it here. It is the pawn on c5, meaning it's not blocked. No pawns or opposite pawns either in front or next to that. Meaning if everything would disappear, meaning if bishop and knight would disappear, that's what I mean by everything, then I would try to promote the pawn. It's not going because there is the theory of the square. You draw a square around this pawn, like that I'm drawing it, or a square that goes, the diagonal is this one. And let's make the other diagonal, and this marks the, I can even do, how about I do the perimeter of the square. 1, 2, 3, 4. You see the square here. The king is inside the square. King inside the square means my pawn by itself cannot promote. But I would bring my king, support the pawn. White would need to have the king in front to block it. And in the meantime, I would win the isolated pawns like the pawn d5 or b5 and so on. That was going to be my plan if bishop and knight disappeared. That's why I need to make sure that bishop and knight remain at least until the pawn situation returns to his favor. Bishop goes to d3 for me, my next move. I want to attack the pawn on b5. Just as good as a computer, but I want to stop the knight from moving. Otherwise, b5 pawn is also lost. And now I have another passed pawn if this happens. King to c2 for to d2 for alt to threaten my bishop. Bishop to c5. I'm sorry. To c4, again exerting pressure on the pawn on b5, also on the pawn on d5. So the knight must stay there. 2 pawns are in danger. We completed 35 moves, and what is the score? I'm leading by 3.3, as you see here. Things seem to be going nice to me, but pawn endings are very tricky, very easy things to change. King to e3. My king to f8, activate the king. Pawn to f5. My king to e7, activate the king. If I can bring my king to d6, the pawn on d5 is lost. Because attacked twice by bishop and king, defended only once by knight. King to f4 for alt-5. King to f6 for me. Computer would rather have me push the pawn and have the king near to the d6. I understand it. Pawn to g4 for alt-5. And my bishop goes to d3. And this is a mistake. For one move, alt-5 is ahead by 3.6. If only alt-5 can continue correctly. What I wanted to do is, in case the pawn would go to g5 check, after things were exchanged, I would win the pawn on f6. That's what I was thinking. And look at that. I had only 27 seconds for the rest of the game. So easy to make mistakes. In fact, let me give a look. I think this is the first mistake I made in the entire game. Yes, it's the first mistake I did in the entire game. Yes, the first mistake I made, but look at that. Even though my opponent made so many more mistakes, one mistake at this point for me and my opponent is winning 3.6. If only they continue correctly. But let's see what did Alt-F do. Pawn to h4, a huge miss. What computer wants is pawn goes to d6. I have to take the pawn. Knight checks. And it's mate? Yes. Look at that. If pawn goes here, if I don't take it, it promotes. But if I take it, let's assume pawn goes here. I take it. Knight goes to d5. And believe it or not, I'm checkmated. Out of nowhere. Just because I brought my king to f6 to hope to stop the pawns. What else could I do if I don't take the pawn? And I doubt I would even have seen it in 25 moves. What can I do? My king cannot go anywhere near to stop it. If my bishop, I don't know what I would do. Really, if my opponent had found that move. Because if my pawn moves here, because then the pawn, if it goes here, my king can stop it, then I lose the other pawn from here. And Alt-F has two pass pawns, connected pass pawns on b6 and c6, two squares away from promotion and duck and stop them. There's nothing that you could do because otherwise pawn takes c7 and promotes. But I got lucky. I got lucky. What is luck in chess is when your opponent is winning and they don't see and they play a move that gives away the game. So for one brief moment, Alt-F was winning. But I got lucky. What do I play now? Instead of sending my king back, I push my pawn to c4 to support my bishop on d3. Another miss for a type that at least before had a draw, you see here. But we finished 40 moves, and believe it or not, the game is even. From having huge advantage of more than 3, it's now down to even, although I have an extra pawn. My king on f6 has a very difficult position and danger of checkmate. Now let's see how game continues. Pawn to g5 check. Misses the computer. I take it back. Great, as if I had any other choice. Pawn takes it. King goes to e7. Finally, my only move, finally things started going nice for me. You see I have 3.2 advantage. King goes to e5. King facing each other. This is what's called the opposition. Of course, it's more important if there are other pieces on the board. So if there are not other pieces on the board, so you're forced to do something with your king or with your pawns if you have pawn moves. But another great move, my pawn goes to f6, checks. And when my opponent takes back, as if they have any other choice, I take back and I force the white king to go in the white's half of the board. Goes to d4 to be near my bishop on d3 and my pawn on c4. What do I do? King goes to d6. Trying to stop the pawn from advancing. Knight goes to d1. Perhaps going to b3 and threaten my bishop and my pawn. But before that move, we finished 45 moves. What is the score? I'm leading by 3.3. Once again, after a brief interlude where I was almost losing, I'm ahead. Time becomes more critical. You see, after the 45 moves, Alt-F has 18.7 seconds, and I have 22 seconds. When you have less than 20 seconds, the clock also shows the tenths of the seconds. Now I will take the pawn on f5, but I'm going to lose my pawn on c4. Yes, but the f pawn is further from the other, from white's king, knight, and pawns, and so it is easier to advance. Bishop to g4. Knight to 3 attacks my bishop on g4. My bishop goes to f3, attacks the pawn on d5. For the time being, king on c4 and knight on e3 protected. Let's see what's going to happen. King goes to d4. And now I'm pushing my pawn to f5. And it is a blunder because I'm just allowing, and suddenly from being ahead with 2.9, as you see, the game is even because I'm giving away my pawn for free. But look at that, I had 20 seconds remaining for the remaining of the game. Knight takes it, I lose the pawn, king goes back to d7, and now the game is even. Each of us has a light piece. I have a bishop and alt-F has a knight, of course the kings, and two pawns. My pawn structure is slightly better because my pawns are near each other. So I have 1 point island versus 2 for alt-I, but on the other side, alt-I's pawns are much more advanced than mine. Let's see how game continues. King to e5. My bishop goes to e2 and attacks the pawn on b5. Knight goes to d4 and both attacks my bishop and saves the pawn. So my pawn goes back to f1. Knight goes to c6. And so I'm winning the pawn. Finally, I'm again a pawn ahead. I'm a pawn ahead. In the score, I'm very little ahead. You see only by 0.2. Let's see how game continues. And the computer thinks a blunder from being ahead by 0.2. Now I'm ahead by 5.0 with knight to b8 and with a check. Very tempting check, but knight is in a square that everywhere it goes, my bishop controls it. After I save my king to c8, knight is under attack, and where can it go? Think about it. If it stays here, it is lost. If it has only 3 squares to go because it's on b8. What are they? The one is d7, it's lost. The other is a6, it's lost. So it can only go to the one square where it is safe, and which is the square it is c6. Safe, of course, the knight will be lost, but at least Alt-F will take my bishop. Otherwise, if the knight is lost for nothing, the game is completely lost. That's what Alt-F is going to do. Send it to c6. The bishop takes it. We finished 55 moves, and I'm ahead by 5.1. And you may be wondering why, because after pawn takes my bishop, the computer doesn't even like that move. Why does the computer prefer the pawn to go to d6? I don't understand. Because here, I take the pawn. King goes here, my king goes b7, and I have extra bishop and pawn. It's not even a rook pawn to have any doubts. I would have played the same thing if I was white. I would have taken the bishop on c6 and crossed my fingers. And what is happening is I have an extra pawn. I have the only passed pawn, but on the other side, the pawn of alt-I is at c6. It is very, very near promotion. If the knight on c7 disappears for any reason, alt-I wins. But I'll make sure it does not. What should I do now? Push the b pawn. The idea, the plan is push the b pawn as far as possible. White king will take it, not a choice, and then my king will take the c6 pawn and my c7 pawn will promote. That is my plan in the 17.2 seconds I had remaining, while Alt-F had only 10.7 seconds. And let's see how the game continues. My pawn to b5 mistakes the computer. So now the game is even. From being ahead 6.0, the game is even. Why? Because Alt-F has a combination that can keep the draw. That's what the computer thinks, but let's see what will happen. King goes to d4, great move, is definitely stopping my pawn. I want my stop, I know my pawn cannot be promoted because I'm going to show you again, once again, this square. I'm going to draw the perimeter of the square. The king is inside that square, or even if it is at the perimeter, it's still considered inside the square. And especially once the king moves to d4, it is inside the square itself. So my pawn alone cannot promote, but I want it to be captured as further as possible so my king has enough time to catch the pawn at c6 and promote with the c7 pawn. And the question is the pawn far enough? And in 17.3 seconds, no way to do the calculations. Even to do the square, you must know the rule by heart and have it instantaneously in your mind to apply it. But to be able to calculate one, one, two, two, then king goes here, king goes back, king goes here, king goes back. Impossible. So still Al-Taif had a draw. Pawn goes to b4, king goes to c4, pawn to b3, king takes at b3. But still the game is 0.0 because yes, my king is much near the c6 pawn, but not near enough. Let's see what's going to happen. My king to d8 starts the route towards the pawn. King goes to c5, king to e7, and now king goes to b5. Computer thinks I'm leading by 0.1. After the 60 move, let's see. Computer thinks the game is completely even. Even the second decimal digit is 0.00. There is a story here what is called the mutual Zugzwang, meaning we may reach a position where whoever has to play is losing because it's forcing the king to go away from action. Let's see how the game continues. My king goes, white king goes to b5. And my king goes to d6. And king goes now. There's a difficult situation for white because no matter where Altaif places the king, the pawn on c6 is lost. But the question is the following: even with an extra pawn, I'm not guaranteed a win. I can only win if the white king cannot go to c1, and especially if white can gain the opposition. How can white gain the position? Now, no matter where the white king goes, the pawn is lost. But if the king would go to, let's come correctly, because now imagine Alt-F has only 12.4 seconds to do this calculation. I have 17.4. If the king goes here, my king goes here, king goes here, and now Alt-F has opposition, meaning I need to move my king, and no matter where I move it, the white king will be two squares ahead, and my pawn, and I cannot liberate the pawn. If I push the pawn with king, my king not being in front of the pawn, it's a draw. This is theory, and either you know it or you don't. And if you don't know it, in 12.4 seconds, impossible to find it. That's why I would like to advise the viewers, please learn very carefully the theory of king and pawn endings, because if you need it in a game, you cannot figure it out. And even if you don't play bullet and you play a classical with lots of time, by the time you reach position, you're so mentally exhausted that you survive until this point, because if you didn't put all the effort before, you wouldn't even be alive by now. That it's very, very difficult, very hard to find it, figure it out. Imagine all the other games in the other tables have been completed, everybody staring at you, the tournament director waiting for the game to finish to go home, and you have to figure out in whatever time remains how will the game continue to survive. And White played the wrong move, and now the game is mine. Why? Because I take the pawn, you'll see why. And now I'm going to block the white king from going anywhere in the A or B files. If it's up to me, I'll make sure my king goes to c1, the pawn will go to c2, then the king can go away and I promote. So the question is, will I be able to promote or not? King to a5, king to c5. Otherwise, king goes to b4 and might stop. But you may think, if I continue position, how will my pawn be pushed? Let's see how. King to c4, king to a4. King to a4, king to c4. Also look at the times. My opponent may hope that I may run out of time, and then it's a draw. I don't lose if I run out of time because my opponent has only the king, but still my opponent could get a draw if I run out of time. But you see, I have a little bit more time than my opponent. I have 18 seconds and Alt-Type has 12.7. King to a3, king to c3. King goes down. What would let's not push too fast. What would happen if king went to a2 as the computer suggests? My king at that time goes to c2. I'm not even sure how I would do this chase. If I push the pawn, king goes to b1. I push again. My pawn, I have to calculate. Should it go 1 or 2 squares? Believe it or not, I'm winning because one of the two choices are correct will give me the position, but good luck trying to find if I should move my c7 pawn 1 or 2 squares. But in theory, I would be winning, even if the king went to a2 and I pushed the pawn. But most likely, if the king went to a2, I would push my pawn to c2. And then if the king goes to a1, of course, I push my pawn all the way. But if the king went back to e3, my pawn goes to c5. If the king tried to come near it, my pawn to c4, and I'm promoting. I think I'm winning either way. But with the king going to a4, things become easier because I'm pushing my pawn to c5. King goes to b5, trying to be near my pawn. My king goes to d4. I'm not sure if this is the best move. That's what the computer says. Places a star in this move, or if the pawn could go here. But I think I would win either way or rather. King to a4. My king goes to d3. King goes to b4 near my pawn. My pawn goes to c4. King to b4. Pawn to c3. King to b3. Pawn to c2. I'm near promotion. King to b2. And of course, I'm not promoting now. You see, now it is mate in 8 moves, m8. And what I play with 16.4 seconds to go, my king goes to, sorry, wrong button. King to b2, and my king goes to d2, and now a mate in 7 moves, and my opponent resigns. From here on, no matter what my opponent my opponent did, I'm promoting to c1, whether with a check or without, and soon I'll force the king to go to the a file, bring my king, and checkmate. This is what happened in this game. 72 moves. And how much time did we use? We used about 168 seconds if you subtract the 12. And if you add the at least my opponent, same for me, let's say 168 and add another 72 for the 72 moves, it makes 250 seconds. Now let's calculate again. 168 plus 72 is 240 seconds. For 72 moves, this is 3 seconds and 1/3 of a second. That is the average time that we spend for the game. Not so easy at all. And let's see under these conditions, how did we fare? What does the computer think about the game? I'm going now to share the entire screen. Let me share once again. The review is ready. Alt-Type played with 77.8 accuracy, and I had 82.8. And Alt-Type played as if the rating was 1850, and I played as if my rating was 2000. Once again, I to tell you, I don't trust these ratings. They're always flattering, at least always when I use it. No brilliances. Grade 5 for me, 2 for Alt-Type, book for each of us. Best 27 versus 26 for me. Excellent 18 versus 14 for Alt-Type. Good, 10 versus 8 for me, and inaccuracies 8 for me, 6 for Altaif. Mistakes 3 for me, 2, 3 for Altaif, 2 for me. Misses 2 for Altaif, 1 for me, and 1 blunder each. And after this game, my rating went up to 1492. I need one more win against a player at least my level, and I hit my goal of 1500, a goal I had set in late December. In spoiler in advance, yes, I'm going to win the next game. We're going to see that in the next video. In the meantime, thanks everybody for watching it, viewers, subscribers, likes, the nice comments. This is grecochess. I'm your host, Harry Lasaniziris. And for now, to all of you, goodbye.